Hello, everybody. I'm Ursula and I'm here with Anne, Be Above Leadership. And we are going to talk about our 7 levels of effectiveness, our 7 levels of consciousness model. And we're going to explore and maybe answer some of the questions you might have. Hello,
Awesome.
Anne.
Hi. Yeah, we're going to keep this fairly big picture because there are a lot of sort of contextual things about this model. And maybe the first one is, we use two different words. We say levels of effectiveness, we say levels of consciousness. Sometimes we even say levels of vibration or levels of awareness. So Ursula, why do we use all these different words for this model? What is it really?
Well, I think there's two answers to the question. When we
At least two, if
at
not
least,
more.
if not 20. When we first named it, it is actually called the 7 levels of group and personal and organizational effectiveness. So it's not just personal, but it's also for groups and organizations. And quite honestly, to be completely transparent, we felt that especially if we use it in organizations, the word effectiveness is what resonates. The word consciousness might not. Having said that, effectiveness, the more effective we become in life, the more conscious we are, and the more conscious we are, the more effective we become. So there is a link, and this is one of the reasons why we use it interchangeably.
Yeah, I think that I'm trying pondering that because I think that's probably true. Real effectiveness, we're not just talking, and that's a really interesting question of what is real effectiveness. We're not just talking about, short-term profits or quarterly earnings. So, I was going to say, effectiveness is a result of, it's the impact of consciousness. It's what occurs when consciousness and awareness shift. But I think you're also right, as you are actually more effective in the world, some of what is happening, it's because your consciousness is increasing as
Yes.
well.
Yeah,
So
no, absolutely. And I love what you're saying about, it's really what we often talk about when we talk about our 7 levels is really it's your come from place will shape the results you create in the world. So it stands to reason that the more conscious you become, that is your come from place will create a different result.
Mm-hmm. You make me think of the time that we were training this in an organization, and the leader, who was not a particularly well-regulated or effective leader, was literally standing. We had the levels laid out on the floor, and she was literally standing in one yelling at everybody, "Why don't you join me up here?" So, it's not like you can just choose, I'm going to be there. I'm going to, by fiat decree, that our organization is in synchronicity or innovation. That's not how that works. You can't just decide that's where you're going to be. It's a much more complicated process than that.
I had a really interesting experience last week as I was working with a group of people, which really brought that point home. I think that it's easy to be more effective and more conscious and more, as you said, regulated. Our brains are calmer, our body is calmer, we're more integrated and all that when things are great, when things are just sort of humming along. It's just that's easy. But when we face a challenge, then to be above the line, then to be looking and choosing an above the line level is a lot harder. And that actually takes really a lot of work.
Yeah, and so part of what is really different about what we've done with this model is that we've been working for a number of years, at least 10, to try to find as much validation in neuroscience as we can.
Yes.
And to say, what does make us more effective and what is happening in the brain that allows for that. And so, in a really basic way, and a lot of people know this, being a leader who is less reactive is going to make you more effective. You're going to have a better long-term impact. You're going to keep your teams or your employees' brains more regulated themselves, more positive towards you. There's more creativity, lots of reasons. So when we look at the 7 levels, some of what we're looking at each level is what's actually happening that we can surmise in the brain.
Yes.
And so we have 3 levels that we call below the line and 4 that we call above the line. And we really believe that the brain is operating differently at each one of these. So why do we call them below and above, Ursula?
So below the line, if you've had a chance to look at the 7 levels on our website, is hopelessness, fear, and frustration. And then comes courage. And courage is the line. It's sort of like the imaginary line, if you so will. It's that first level.
Like turning point. It's
turning. It's the switch. Is the shift. It's the shift point.
There's no neutral. There's no sort of gray area where you're just kind of hanging out in space. You're either below the line or above.
Yeah, so that this is why, anything that is below courage, we call below the line, and anything including courage, and then comes engagement, innovation, and synchronicity, those levels are above the line. And so courage, what we always talk about is, in order to go from below the line, any state, any level, to an above the line state, you have to take the first step, and the first step is courage. There isn't a shortcut.
Right, right. You might only spend a short time there, but often what's keeping you below the line is lack of courage. You're making me think, so we're very heavily originally influenced by Dr. David Hawkins and his model of consciousness. He's, we think of, he's sort of got us on this path, and then we've been really looking at the science behind all of this, and both how to make it simpler and more complex. But one of the things that he said is that in his model, anything below a certain calibration is taking energy from life. So our below the line levels, you are going to ultimately not contribute to life, not contribute to the enterprise. It might seem like you're getting somewhere by being really angry or demanding and toxic. You might seem like you're getting these results, but ultimately you won't. They won't stand the test of time. We can think of lots of examples of that. Above the line, even at the very beginning of courage, even as you tiptoe across the line and you just start to imagine a different future, you are contributing energy to life. That's when I say there's no neutral where you're just hanging out, not good or bad. You're either sucking from the world or giving to the world. And the more you go above the line, the more that energy expands and the more impact you have in a positive way. Yes. The more you go below the line, the more it expands in its shadow, and the less you contribute, and the more darkness you're actually bringing to the world.
Yeah. Well, talk about effective. If you want to be effective in a really authentic way in business, in your relationship, the relationship that you have with yourself, that starts in courage, and then that effectiveness expands the more above the line you go.
Yeah, someone asked me the other day, and I thought this was such a good question because nobody's ever exactly asked me this before. This is so good. And he said, "How are you defining effectiveness?" I thought, what a great question. And I actually have an answer for it.
Oh, great.
And I'm curious if you have one, but my definition of effectiveness is less effort, more results. It's less, you can get results even in frustration. I like to say you can get anybody to do anything if you hold a gun to their head. But they won't do it willingly, and they won't do it when you go away. And then, hopefully in a law-abiding society, you get caught, and, that's not good. Threat and domination, you can get short-term results, but there's going to be long-term cost.
Yes.
But the more you go above the line, some of what's happening is your brain is working in a more harmonious way, and you're also bringing that to the people around you. So their brains are working in a more harmonious way. So you don't have to yell at people to get them to do a good job. They want to. And they
Yes.
bring their creativity and they bring you ideas you never even thought of, because that's the impact you're having.
Yeah, it's, you really speak to, Dr. Hawkins' book, Power versus Force. I mean, it really is the below the line levels, there's a force energy. And above the line is this beautiful unfolding, unleashing of your power, your empowerment. And because of that, you are also empowering other people. So one of the questions I think that we are being asked often, and which I really love about our 7 levels, is like, oh, below the line, that's really bad. And above the line, and the more above the line you are, you score an A,
Yes, you get an A if you're in synchronicity. You won life. You're in synchronicity. There you go.
Exactly. And of course, from neuroscience studies and also, really diving deeply into consciousness, we know that that's not true. So the 7 levels are an inclusive model. So what I mean by that is when you encourage, for example, it includes frustration, fear, and hopelessness. So it's not that below the line is bad, it's just, it's an is. If you're anxious or mad, it just is what you feel. It's just, I always say to my clients, just don't do anything from there. Don't touch anything.
Don't let that part of you drive the bus, because it might drive you
Exactly.
over a cliff, but listen to what it has to say. So I think there's two things that I want to build on with what you're saying. One is that we really hold that every part of our being, a human being, includes hopelessness, fear, frustration, courage, engagement, innovation, and synchronicity. That's what it is to be a human being. And as you increase in effectiveness, you develop more compassion, more ability to listen, that it's not about controlling the out of control lower parts of your brain and getting them to behave and shoving them aside if they're not. It's about increasing your ability to listen to what they're saying, find what is useful, and have compassion for your own humanity. That's what actually makes you more effective.
And it has a huge impact chemically on the brain and the body. So what you're speaking to is so scientifically proven, and this is what really helps understand the below the line levels, that there's your brain is not working effectively.
Yeah, whether that, and I want to talk about is that temporary or permanent? Let's come back to that. The other thing that I want to say about the 7 levels is back when I was first a consultant, I learned this thing called the 7 hats process. And this was this idea that you would look at it's a great process, by the way, for a team, and everybody would wear a different hat, and you'd wear the critic hat, or you'd wear the, rah-rah hat, and you'd look at an issue from all of these different hats.
Mm-hmm.
I bring that up because that's not the 7 levels. They are not 7 different perspectives that you can say, well, I'm gonna, now what I need is the energy of courage. Because if you're in engagement, as Ursula was saying, it includes courage. You're dipping down. It's like an increase in light. It's a decrease in toxicity. Sometimes we'll show in our classes a slide that has sort of like, how drinkable is the water? How full is your water of crappy stuff? And as you go, into the 7 levels, what you get is cleaner water.
Yes.
So they're not 7 different stepping stones in the garden and you can go stand on that one. It's inclusive and an increase.
Yes. Yeah. No, really, very well said. Hi, Pazzi. That then also brings me to this other interesting place of, are people in one place?
Yeah. Are they,
like, I'm encouraged. This is where I hang out.
Sorry. I get so excited because people will say things like, oh, and this person, they'll often say things like, oh, and this person, they're so in synchronicity.
Yeah.
We haven't met anybody who lives in synchronicity, by
Well,
the way, nominate somebody if you think they really do, because as Ursula was saying, it's all great to be able to really have this amazing perspective of synchronicity when things are going well. Can you have that when they absolutely suck? And can you include everything that you feel and honor it and be present to it and not judge it? It's a complex state. But I want to give you more chance to talk about, is this like a permanent thing? Like now you're wearing the costume of this model, or is it more
this is
complex?
where I am stuck forevermore. No, it's not. It is more like a radio wave. And this will change from hour to hour, from day to day, week to week. So for example, when I got up this morning, I had a good night's sleep, and I think I was somewhere in engagement, sort of really looking at, the great day I was going to have, and, and so on. And then I opened my email before I worked out, and I saw a sort of a little bit of a disconcerting, I should say, email from someone, and I dipped down right into frustration. And as I was reading it, I was going down into, fear, and and then I thought, no, I'm gonna go and work out, and let's see where this takes me. And then I worked out, and I went sort of back into courage, and then I had an email exchange with Anne, and this always takes me up into innovation. So it's not that we are at any given time are stuck in one place. It is a constant moving between the levels. It's
Yeah,
a radio wave.
I'm showing sort of a funny little radio wave here. That is one way of looking at it, and that it can be, on any given day, we can be fluctuating all over the place. But what we have discovered is that people seem to have a home frequency, that we can go higher. And there's some evidence, I think I read this in a book by Ken Wilber, and it makes sense given our experience, that whatever your kind of home frequency is, you probably spend about half the time there, and 25% of the time lower, and 25% of the time higher. And so you might be with a wonderful teacher in a really wonderful, personal development group where you're just all in love with each other, and everybody is so wise and amazing, and it just feels like life is amazing. That's sort of because you have the capacity to go higher. And then you go back in your life and you think, how come I can't bring this at every minute of every day? It's because it's not a stable state yet. It's giving you an idea, and probably the leader is holding that container, and the group is co-creating it.
Yes.
People, this is one of the reasons that they, say in groups like that, like, don't fall in love with someone in this group, because it's a different kind of container that may not be able to be self-generated on your own.
Yes. That's
So,
a really, really good point.
yeah. And then I think it's also, and then as Ursula said, you get those annoying emails or bad news, or, just something difficult or unexpected, or in the middle of all of a sudden you're having a global pandemic. This is really fascinating. And it's where do you kind of recover to? Where do you tend to recover to? And that gives you a sense of, there's like a home frequency that you can kind of rely on yourself. And when we think about helping people develop in the 7 levels, what we want is to help them shift the home frequency. So where they recover, not that they're never going to feel hopeless or frustrated. Of course you are, you're a human being. That is not the goal. The goal is that you've got this place that you can return to. And part of that is helping your brain become more stronger and more integrated.
And I really love what you're saying, because it really points to what I believe really is one of the gifts of the 7 levels that I have experienced in my own life. It's not that I'm never afraid or anxious or feel sad and hopeless. It's the recovery time to an above the line level. That gap between, my frustration, which, is sort of my modus operandi, to an above the line state, whether it's courage or engagement or anything else, that gap has really shortened. I recover so much faster.
I always laugh when this comes up. My grandmother, who I loved dearly, but she would occasionally, you would get her into this loop where she was still telling the story of this girl in high school who was so mean to her. right? Like
You're
she's
like
still
60
back
years,
there.
60
She's
years
still mad
later.
about that. Right? Like at some point, you know, that's like a really long recovery place. And I want to be able to experience, and certainly what we know, and this was a real gift from the original the original book we first read with David Hawkins. He was really clear that if you want to shift a level, what you need to do is not try to shift it, but be present to where you are.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
the best way to shift it. And I have found that understanding the 7 levels, it also gives me more permission to be where I am because I know it's not permanent.
Well, and you know, in our classroom and in our teachings, we often say, as soon as you are present to the below the line levels, you're not below the line anymore, because it takes courage. You are above the line. You are in courage, because it takes courage to be present to your frustration, your anxiety, your hopelessness, and you know, to be able to be in courage and to look at that from a more of an observer standpoint is really one of the big gifts that the 7 levels offers people, I think.
Yeah, I love that. And it shows us that most people, most neurotypical people, not everyone is neurotypical. Some people have disruptions that make moving on the levels more difficult, but most neurotypical people are capable of courage, you know, and helping and even in areas that feel really difficult, it's sort of like, can I find at least courage? And we've been working with this model for about 15 years in some form or another. We've been doing neuroscience correlation to it for about 10 at this point. And one of the things we found is there's still things to discover about it.
Yeah.
We like to say it's deceptively simple, endlessly complex, but we're recording this in the middle of COVID-19. It's May 2020, and this is one of the toughest things I think the world has gone through. And one of the things that's really helped both me and Ursula is the 7 levels, and understanding that, number one, I need to be present to my below the line state, but I also need to know I have a choice.
Yes.
So no spiritual bypass, presence, but also choice has been really, really helpful.
Yes, absolutely. Well, as you say, deceptively simple, endlessly complex. We've given you a brief overview. I'm sure there's more to come. Go into our website, beaboveleadership.com. There is a description of the 7 levels. And we hope that this is helpful.
Yeah, thank you for joining us today. Bye, Ursula.
Bye-bye, and take care.